Good afternoon, New Zealand. Lucas Lawman's here, Kiwi Voice, and I thought it was definitely about time to be talking some Three Waters, as there's been a lot of goings on around the country, specifically in Wellington, the High Court yesterday. So we'll do the usual and wait for a few people to get on, and we'll give you plenty of welcomes, and then we'll get straight into it. We've got a page and a half or so of yarning. So thanks to anyone that does take the time to tune in. We'll get rid of a few bits and pieces there. Yeah, look, obviously it's been topical since last year. A lot of people have been concerned, talking, and with a bit of, what would I say, the mainstream media has been fairly absent in terms of covering it fairly and down the middle, or more so even really, they haven't really been covering it in depth, is more my concern, if I was to be totally honest with you. Now, I'm just going to shut a chat here. Sorry, team. Thanks, everyone that is jumping on. Okay, we're getting rid of that. Excellent. Alrighty, thanks everyone that is jumping on and coming to have a hang out with us. We'll dive straight into it. We've got quite a bit to get through. Right, so Three Waters, like I said, it's been covered on a number of occasions, but you could probably count less than 10 since it was introduced last year. I did a bit of a quick search around some of the mainstream sites before we jumped on today while doing my research, and it's fairly weak, fairly high level, not really in-depth coverage. So I thought it was worth a little bit of an explainer, as well as a little bit of what's going on at the moment in response to it. For me, it should be the leading story. It is what affects the majority of New Zealanders the most at this time, in these current turbulent times. So look, let's get into it. It's easily one of the most controversial and divisive New Zealand government policies in decades. I think I'd be fairly comfortable in saying that. This current Labour government proposed Three Waters reforms have sparked nationwide protests and roadshows, i.e. the Taxpayers Union roadshow that we covered off the other day, against a backdrop of almost universal opposition from representative entities, and I'm talking councils and otherwise, across the country, and there's been very little in-depth mainstream media coverage. The march towards implementation of the reforms by Nanaia Mahuta and the working group tasked with doing so has encountered public questioning and opposition at almost every turn, and I'm sure the people that are joining us today and the people that will view this and comment later will feel the same. Yet our mainstream media continues to fail, in my opinion, to adequately cover these issues in any real meaningful way, other than to quote ad-lib government ministers that are of course in support of the reforms, and paint the picture that the situation is critical and something must be done now. Reality tells us, though, and as noted by our conversations with Tom O'Connor down in South Canterbury, that some council areas are in need of investment, so there's no question about it. Some council entities, some areas are absolutely in need of investment in their water infrastructure. Let's just get that out in the open. They definitely are, but some don't. In fact, most don't. And this is one of the many reasons why the centralisation of all water management, including assets, is so widely opposed across the country. Who says that someone in the small Waimate District Council wants to pay into a entity whereby the whole of the bottom half of the South Island is managed? It's just not accepted, and it's the sort of almost the last bastion of local democracy down to that level. There has been a more local and area-specific, there has to be a more local and area-specific solution. There just must be, to what is also a local and area-specific problem. So, for those that don't actually really know, I'm sure most of you guys are actually pretty well educated on this. I don't want to tell anyone how to suck eggs, but for those that don't know, what are the Three Waters reforms? Well, the government wishes to move the current management of New Zealand's Three Waters, so that's tap water, wastewater and stormwater, from the existing councils, 67 of those across New Zealand, to 4 large regional entities with unelected management When I say unelected, non-democratically elected management, of which 50% will be iwi, regardless of the fact that Māori make up only a much smaller percentage of the New Zealand population. I've written 17%. I was a little bit hesitant to chuck that out there. Anyone that's got that correct number, if that's not the right one, please chuck it in the comments below, let me know, but obviously not 50%. Across the country daily, there is action on this vital initiative, both for and against, right? So most recently, just yesterday, and this is what sparked my interest and sort of pushed me to get a bit of a yarn up on Kiwi Voice in regards to this, Timaru, Waimakariri and Whangarei district councils in a joint effort have taken the Minister of Local Government, Nanaia Mahuta, to court. Yeah, they've taken her to court, seeking to gain declaration from the court that local councils own and or control local infrastructure assets, that ratepayers and others generally funded wholly or materially paid for infrastructure assets, and that compensation should be paid if a law change took away ownership of all those assets. So essentially what they're saying is they want a flat-out lawful declaration that the council's still going to own it, and that this type of reform can't be used further down the track for anything else. So good forward thinking from these brave mayors, councillors of these smaller councils. Now, the government's argument against this, once again, is that many communities cannot afford their part of an estimated 120 to $185 billion required investment over 30 years, which is needed, they say, to fix, build and maintain water infrastructure. Remembering the three water infrastructure: tap, waste and storm. These figures have been widely disputed in multiple forums, outlets to date. And again, some councils need investment and most of them don't. The other main argument put forth by the government is that it's not just the assets that would be transferred into these entities, it is also the debt that is attached to them. But again, some of them have debt, some of them do not. They state that being moved into these entities with government backing would make them more usable for borrowing. Now, why that's an argument in these times, sheesh. When Mahuta and Cabinet accepted the proposed law changes, they knew it was transferring delivery of services from councils to entities that could borrow more money and have better management while keeping the ability of councils to govern and own them. This is the words of Mike Colson QC, who is acting on behalf of the Crown. Now, my concern with the borrowing aspect is, what more borrowing should or could we really be doing in these times? Now, I've been paying a bit of attention to a bit of an economic legend over in the States, Peter Schiff, and his predictions, dire, unfortunately, predictions for the way inflationary pressure and economic downturn is going. Obviously, interest rates, saving rates in relation to official cash rates and inflation rates, and really simplified, it's obviously a lot more complicated than this. But in order to really control inflation, they need to restrict the money supply, the interest rates for savings, etc., and therefore mortgages and so forth need to be higher than the actual true inflation rate, which some are predicting is more around the sort of 12 to 15%, and not the 7 to 10 that is quoted, depending on the way that you read it, and therefore increasing the money supply by borrowing further and against critical government assets, not government assets, critical local council assets at this time is utter madness. Now, that's a Kiwi Voice opinion, but based on my simple understanding of economics, no way, not a good idea. Mayors Nigel Brown and Dan Gordon and Cheryl Mai, so that's from Timaru, Waimakariri and Whangarei, are looking for from the courts declarations that they believe will protect democratic process for anything of this nature that affects such a wide area of society for now and into the future. They see this as a model that could be used elsewhere, and that's what's concerning to them. Utter madness, Amiria, you're absolutely right. We'll jump in and check out a couple of comments here as well. Hey Matt, thanks for joining in. Barb, thank you for the stars. That's awesome. Now, Nigel, the Timaru mayor, he states, now this is a bit of a long statement, and apologise for just reading straight off, but it sums it up perfectly. Property rights are absolutely fundamental in New Zealand. If you've bought and paid for something, you should have reasonable control over it. Simple. And a legitimate expectation that it will not be expropriated without compensation. So taken off you without compensation. As owners on behalf of the community of this critical infrastructure, we want to ensure that any future changes respect these basic rights, Nigel says. While Three Waters reform prompted this action, what we're talking about here concerns some really basic and fundamental rights that most people ordinarily would take for granted and normally wouldn't be up for discussion or even be a source of contention. It is so refreshing to hear a representative of the people actually going down this train of thought and laying it out in a High Court case. Good man. The fact that government are seeking to undermine basic property rights sets a risky precedent for New Zealand. We don't believe that concepts such as collective ownership with no control of assets and shares that don't deliver any of the usual rights or obligations that go with equity ownership are in line with existing property rights and laws. And he's right. If this goes unchallenged, the simple line to draw is that if government can single-handedly redefine ownership of Three Waters infrastructure in this manner, then where else could it apply these concepts? Could roads or ports companies be next? That the government is working so hard to dismiss this case and undermine these basic property rights should be a red flag and a real concern for all New Zealanders. Now, I'm sure everyone watching and people that watch this later on, Kiwi Voice followers, thank you all, will completely and utterly agree and be just almost, it's almost refreshing, it's almost a relief in some ways to hear a democratically elected representative speak in this way. Let's just cover off those last 2 points again. If this goes unchallenged, the simple line to draw is that if government can single-handedly redefine ownership of Three Waters infrastructure in this manner, then where else could it apply these concepts? Could roads or port companies be next? That the government is working so hard to dismiss this case and undermine these basic property rights should be a real flag and a real concern for all New Zealanders. It's just put so succinctly and so clearly. What is missed in all of this conversation is the precedent that continues to be set with a majority government such as this one that we've got in power at the moment. Things that are being done that are, just haven't been even looked at or tried for decades or ever, and therefore precedents do get set. So if this legislation goes in, where else could they use it? And looking forward to the future, to all the people that I've spoken to at all the Freedom and Rights Coalition protests and other protests all around Canterbury and New Zealand, then the general theme that comes through all of that is concern for the future and trying to articulate that. Here you've got it. So really good to see Nigel standing up and stating that for us. So that's the situation where we're at the moment with Three Waters. There is continued challenges. The one in the High Court of Wellington is just one of many. There's a lot more stuff to go into with this, of course, but Kiwi Voice will keep reporting on this critical issue. Now, our position here at Kiwi Voice is being that this should absolutely be left alone by central government with potentially some advocacy on behalf of the council areas that actually need assistance only. That's my position, that's Kiwi Voice position. While it is heartening to see local mayors standing up for the rights of their constituents, and I truly do applaud them, the battle is still very much in front of us. That's us, team here on Kiwi Voice. We'll jump into a couple of these comments before we close things off for you. Thanks to everyone that's taken the time to hang out and watch with us. Art of Madness, yep, great points. That statement exactly sums it up, says Kim Toka, my bad. Huge red flags, yes. As we already have seen in many areas, madness. How does this government just take and do what they want? How? Well, this is what you're seeing now, Kim Toka, is essentially the result of a large majority government and the arrogance that comes with it. So the structure of the government from the last election, we know, was a landslide red wave Labour victory and majority. They are doing everything they can in their term in office, in power, now to take use of that majority and just to the full extent. And I don't think that New Zealand society was prepared for an MMP eventuation like this. Obviously, MMP was designed to give a voice to a number of minor parties or smaller parties to cover a larger cross-section of the people. And to be honest, MMP, I like that idea. I'm with it. It's where you get, whatever you think of them now, it's where you get ACT in power with 10 seats. You get Greens, Labour, National, all in government. Great. However, when you get a large majority, as Labour have now got, a lot of that goes out the window, and I don't think that New Zealand really fully understood that. So that's where we're at, and that's how it's happening. They just can, based on outdated rules and legislation. Jane says, it sounds like asset stripping to me. Yep. Living in West Auckland with already paid for infrastructure and water catchment in the Waitakere Ranges, Māori do not have 50% of the funding for upgrading infrastructure in New Zealand, but they were delighted in the royalties. Okay, Sandra says, what's the use of Governor-General when she doesn't do her job? Get rid of Chomper et al. Fair enough. I'm not sure about the Chomper comment there, Sandra, but I totally agree with you. What does the Governor-General do these days? I don't actually know. And thank you for sending stars. Really appreciate it, team. Any support is greatly appreciated for Kiwi Voices. We continue to ramp up our coverage of anything that matters to the people. Absolutely, I get it. Yep, 100%. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it once again, as I say. Where does it stop? We'll count. Oh, yes, Bruce. So Bruce and I were talking off air. He's my local mic repairman and friend of the show. And we were talking about the council's responsibility. So that's a good point to make before we close off there from Bruce. Once you take away Three Waters, the actual responsibility from council, the actual responsibility of council managing the local ratepayers and what to do with it, it diminishes greatly. What are they actually going to be doing if they're not going to be looking after Three Waters? It could well mean the next step, and it's just chucking it out. It's conjecture. It's who knows. It's theory. It may or may not happen, but a theory is that councils could disband, and we just won't have them, and there'll be one centralisation, one step closer to the dreaded C word. Yeah, they must be gone at the next election. I think that's pretty well accepted. Alrighty, team. We're going to go continue on the research. Keep an eye on Kiwi Voice for part 2 of Tom O'Connor's yarn. It's all around treaty history, so it's quite deep, it's quite full on and interesting. Not so political per se, but a really good yarn. So keep an eye out for that one. We're trying to get Councillor Sam McDonald on the line, who did agree to do so, to talk with us further about Three Waters. And I'll continue to reach out with people. They seem to come, or two people, they come in fits and starts for sure. Whether we get people on the show or not, we'll keep working on it. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. We will close off. Stay safe, stay free.